Hello everyone, and welcome to this information session for the Ukraine Civil Society Facility. On behalf of the EU delegation, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this thematic information session. My name is Sinziana Poiana. I work for the EU delegation to Ukraine, and I cover civil society support there. The reason you're here is because you are interested in one of the lots that make available funding for civil society organizations within our recently launched call on the 16th of June. In this session, you will hear more of why we chose this specific thematic priority, what do we expect from civil society to deliver, why do we focus on certain types of actions, why do we choose certain type of organizations to be eligible to apply and access this funding. So for the next 45 minutes or so, you will hear presentations from colleagues from the EU delegation to Ukraine who will speak to you about the specific sector you are interested in, but also we will take some of your questions that you submitted through your registration form and try to answer them as good as possible and as interesting for you as possible. A small reminder, even though you submitted questions through the registration form, do not forget to also send them to our email address and ask for official clarifications if you need them or if you have further inquiries that you would like to make. You have this possibility open until July 24. Before we move to the presentation of the specific thematic area, I would just like to recall a few elements of the call. For those of you who are not able to attend the general information session on June 22nd, please take a moment and have a look at it on EU Prosteer website. You will be able to retrieve the recording for that session and hopefully have your own presentation of what the general call is about, if it is easier for you to do it that way than by reading the guidelines. I wish you all the best of luck with the application for this call, and I do hope that this information session will be very useful for the design of your concept note and that you will finally decide to apply for this call and be successful to the next stage. Until then, deadline 14th of August, remember, stay well and safe. I think I'm having a small. Okay, so I'm on. First of all, apologies to those of you who may be seeing this for the recorded intro streamed for the third time today. To follow up on a promise in that video, I don't know how many of you had the occasion to attend the information session yesterday. You can see it recorded, but maybe just a quick reminder on the background of this call. So the general title is Ukraine Civil Society Facility. The funds that are made available are coming from various streams of funding, including the European Neighborhood Instrument that has a very strong focus on advancing human rights and democracy and supporting civil society organizations to achieve their mandate in promoting reforms and the rule of law. Those of you who have been working with the EU in the area of rule of law, I hope a lot of you are here today, know that basically in the post-Maidan era of Ukrainian history, the EU has been very strong in trying to support civil society organizations in promoting reforms. And even though the funding that is now made available may seem a little bit restricted in comparison to other streams of funding, this was also to recall that this is very important for us, and that the work that you do, which is supported through various other projects that we have ongoing, is basically worth our attention also for the future. The reason why we wanted to make available funding in the area of what we have now called in a general way Lot 5 rule of law is because we would like to continue also the work of building more trust in institutions, and the work that you guys are doing on monitoring advocacy is obviously very important for on the long run, achieving this a higher trust between citizens and government that would ultimately lead to more performance of services and to better governance in general. I would also like to mention that unfortunately my colleagues who deal with rule of law and law enforcement in the EU delegation were not able to join us here today, but with their permission and with their support, I will be running you through some of the main elements of our policy on rule of law and promoting reforms in the area of justice. What are the problems that we see now with the Ukrainian landscape when it comes to also to anti-corruption, and of course the main elements of our funding. We received only one question from you during the registration forms. That probably means that everything is clear and you know what we expect, and you know how to write your application already. I hope this will be quite a short and concise session, because we do have this extra time. If there are any questions on spot, particularly related to the technicalities of the funding, I think it would be you can write them in the chat, and if I do have the chance to answer them, I will. So, courtesy of my colleagues Manfredas Limantas, who is our guru on rule of law and justice reform in the delegation, a few elements. Why is rule of law important to us? I think, as you can read in this short introduction of Lot 5 in the guidelines, I mean, there are a number of lessons learned that we have drawn from development and political work done by multiple actors around the world as to why rule of law is so important. First, to achieve political and social stability, especially on the long run. Corruption in itself in all the areas has a major economic costs. We have seen studies in the past 20, 30 years that have try to quantify even how costly corruption is. In Ukraine here, we have even a figure from the estimated corruption level in the customs area to 1 billion per year at the end of 2018. Of course, a high level of corruption creates less and less incentive for foreign investment to flow into the country whenever investors do not have the predictability in the economic sector, that they will be treated fairly or that they would know how to conduct business in the country. In a very concrete way, we have seen cases, in Ukraine, but across the world, where petty corruption has a very direct and immediate effect on the quality of public services, but also I would add to this presentation access to public services. And you will notice based on this that one of our sub-priorities under this lot has actually to do with access to justice, especially for vulnerable groups, because we see a major risk in Ukraine there. And of course, all in all, when we look at the perception index for corruption, on the long run, a high level of corruption can create a high erosion in public trust and emigration. And of course, in Ukraine, it creates less and less certainty as to the willingness and the chances of Ukraine to grow closer to the European Union. Currently, what are the main challenges? Of course, what you see here in the slide, we understand is a very basic summary. We do know that they are very wide, but just to give you a general idea of what we understand. So obviously, the Ukraine post 2014 has committed to carry out some serious rule of law reforms. Reforms have been going on at
different speeds in the past years. However, what we're experiencing now since last fall is a moderate blockage of judicial reform in particular, which is why you probably noticed this very strong focus also for the funding that we make available on justice reform, part of which we consider judicial reform to be. Then the fact that there is no sectoral development strategy for justice and law enforcement reform, so it is unclear as to what is the political willingness of leaders in Ukraine to drive which parts of the reform and in which way, absence of targets and so on, everything that comes with the strategy, and of course also that makes it more difficult for civil society organizations and for citizens to actually follow up on political commitments from the government. Then even when there is willingness and even when things are meant to progress in certain institutions, there is a dire lack of capacity, either technical or financial, or coming from organizational shortages or poor management that prevents even high performers or those who have willingness to advance the reform to actually carry out what they set out to do. Which leads me to the next point, the fact that a lot of the institutions that are mandated to initiate and carry out this type of reforms do face internal organizational challenges. They're still struggling with setting up their business processes, finding secure, relevant and efficient IT solutions on how to carry out the reform. All of this having, again, a very immediate effect on how citizens perform, or on how citizens perceive the performance of this reform, looking at the court system alone, for example. The lack of transparency and accountability in justice and law enforcement, but I think also in multiple sectors where this has an effect. And of course, the ultimate consequence that this low public trust is maintained. And of course, the debate around public trust generated from either corruption or anti-corruption work is endless. But I think in general, on the long run, the EU takes the stance that anti-corruption work and the work that you guys are doing is actually meant to increase public trust. So what is the EU doing? This is just a brief overview. I'm sure that all of you are aware. So obviously the association agreement between the EU and Ukraine has very tight and quite strict benchmarks for rule of law, and this is something that we take very seriously in bilateral dialogue, but also in our regular monitoring of the implementation of the association agreement. Ukraine has certain targets that it itself committed to achieve in order to bring the rule of law standard closer to the European one. Of course, a very important tool for us, the visa suspension mechanism, again with periodical review from the EU side, that can, in the case of a backslide, lead to the suspension of visa liberalization in Ukraine. And then, of course, a number of other processes or tools or forms of support that the EU has for Ukraine and its citizens that are tied to rule of law benchmarks. And my colleagues put here very nicely for me the MFA assistance, very important in these times as well. Policy and political dialogue, so the extent to which we would engage in political dialogue Ukraine may be affected by a potential backslide or even reversing reforms in the area of rule of law. And of course, the way that we position ourselves towards other international donors and what other international donors would do in the area of rule of law, with the EU sort of taking a leadership role here in Ukraine in driving the rule of law agenda. In terms of support, there are various types of support that we make available to see basically our desired ambitions on the Ukrainian side for rule of law being achieved. First, very big development in the last years is the setup of the EU advisory mission to Ukraine. A number of judges, prosecutors, law enforcement agents from countries from the EU have been working in Ukraine for the past years, working with their Ukrainian counterparts on how to streamline procedures and how to foster learning on what these benchmarks on rule of law mean in the EU and how they can best be implemented. Then, of course, our financial assistance that some of you may know. First and foremost, because some of these projects, particularly the EU anti-corruption project that has just been reviewed, and Prava Justice actually make available themselves support at a smaller scale to civil society organizations. But here, you can see examples of other projects that in different forms are intended to carry out rule of law benchmarks, again, as we see them specifically through the lens of the association agreement. Then our support to civil society, as I said, since 2014, our support to civil society has been intensively focused on supporting CSOs to advance reforms, particularly in the area of public accountability. So this is yet another example where we hope that by supporting you, we will also help Ukraine on the long run achieve its targets in terms of respect and understanding of rule of law benchmarks. And of course, sort of for me, it's a little bit in the same category, support to independent media and investigative journalists that, of course, can provide meaningful information both to the public, but also to international actors such as ourselves. What do we focus on particularly? So this refers mostly to rule of law in general. So this is, let's say, indicative for you to put in relative terms to what you would be reading for the specific Lot 5 in the call proposals. So we are working very closely with Ukrainian authorities on restarting the judicial reform and basically discussing the new proposals that have been made since last fall and seeing how that could fit into the association agenda. Collecting and promoting best practices in court management. Here, my colleague gives even an example on a type of model court initiative. So you may want to check that out if you are not familiar with it. Then alternative dispute resolution. For some of you, this may be something that you actually do, but it is something quite niche. Justice for children, a lot of organizations working on the rights of the child. E-justice, again, going back to optimization of business processes and investing in institutional capacity of justice institutions and other institutions to carry out their tasks. Then enforcement of court decisions, as you know, a very big problem in Ukraine. This lag between sentences and their implementation, police reform, prosecutors reform, and of course, independent and transparent law enforcement agencies. I spoke about it a little bit in the beginning as well, but why is it important for us to support you in promoting rule of law in general? For the third time, we do see your role as being crucial in both, translating what does rule of law mean for the ordinary citizen, but also, in early warning on breaches of rule of law standards as foreseen in the association agreement or in general international practice. Because we count on this information coming from you as well, because of the technical expertise that is coming from civil society on proposals of the Ukrainian government or of regional and local governments or of specialized agencies, because in some cases, especially in immediately post 2014, we have seen situations where consensus was built in a much easier way whenever civil society was acting also as a mediator between government, business sector, and also communities. And of course, because we rely on you, as I said, to serve also as a communicator to the wider public as to what is the situation of rule of law and what does it mean, what is the impact and the meaning for citizens in their day-to-day life to have a rule of law, to live in a country where rule of law is respected versus where it is breached. We have seen also a number of innovations coming from civil society in Ukraine in the past years. So obviously part of the funding, part of the reasons why we made available this funding is because we hope to encourage you also in that direction, including promoting your work at the national level in countries that may be facing similar issues with civil society that is trying goals, and of course because you guys are very good at networks, coalitions, and again I would like to stress this early warning element of being able to use this network coalitions as successfully. And here another message from my colleague Manfredas to you, and a very timely one in general context. So injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So one more incentive why we would want to invest in justice reform in particular. Okay, so that's it on the more, let's say, technical and general side of the presentation. I see that all of you are still there, which is good. It means that everyone has fared through. I am by no means an expert in rule of law or justice, but I guess a subject that concerns us all, and where civil society does have a very strong voice. Very briefly, I would just like to walk you through the more technical details. Again, you see all this information in the guidelines. If you go, by lot 5, you will find all these parameters there. But basically, this is what describes this stream of funding. There are 1.5 million euro available in total. We accept proposals with a minimum EU contribution of 400,000 euro and a maximum of 700,000 euro. Projects need to be between 24 and 30 months. The co-funding rate needs to be between 60% and 90%. So in principle, you need to secure at least 10% co-funding. And this co-funding can, to some extent, be represented by a work of volunteers or interns. You may have heard me saying this before in previous sessions. I will just repeat. So if you do want to take advantage of this, first of all, this will be more relevant full application stage if you get to the point. But you need to think that you will need to monetize their work. Yeah, so normally there must be some sort of volunteer contract or some form of you justifying why and how in the context of the core business of your organization and of the project that you are proposing, this is meaningful as well. But all in all, I cannot promote enough this possibility to use co-funding from volunteer work. In terms of eligibility, so to receive this funding, you need to be a registered civil society organizations in Ukraine. Also, international organizations are able to apply. This is basically to allow you to work on, if you wish to do so, to allow you to work more on standardization and again this international exchange of practices, where I think and many colleagues in the EU delegation think that Ukraine civil society has a lot to do. You are required to have at least one co-applicant to be considered for the funding. There is no maximum, so don't go wild, but whatever whatever makes sense. Your partnership would be evaluated as part of the proposal. So it's in your interest to propose a valuable partnership. Okay, so the only question that we received from you was whether we would accept a concept note on anti-corruption. I think it became clear from my presentation as well that anti-corruption for us, anti-corruption work is basically an integral part of rule of law work. Some of you may have attended our earlier, consultations that we did for the preparation of this call. We did identify at that stage a big gap in funding, international funding being made available specifically on the justice sector. But that being said, whatever area of rule of law you'd like to target, we have narrowed it down in the guidelines to independent and impartial judiciary, promoting accountability of the government, and transparent, efficient, and fair legislative process. And you do have an indicative list of types of actions, but again, this is really not exclusive. So it really depends on you how you construct your justification and your basically logical argument on why the action proposed would contribute to advancing rule of law in Ukraine. You will see our indicative list of actions. So this is basically what we were able to identify from what civil society already does in Ukraine. So types of projects that you can initiate. Again, not exclusive. If you want to come up with something very innovative, if you will not be excluded on the basis. In fact, we're happy to see what else civil society would be willing to do. You will see the list of actions on page 22 of the slide. Under this lot, financial support to third parties is allowed. That means that you are not obliged to have it, but in case it does serve the purpose of the action, then you may incorporate. Financial support to third parties is most commonly known as sub-granting. So when a new partner or partner of a different donor would launch its own proposals for grants to smaller civil society organizations or other types of civic actors. However, it can come in different forms. Cash transfers, purchasing of equipment, for someone else, prizes. So you will see it as a possible type of action. Well, okay, so basically that was it on my side. I have only received one question in the chat. So it's 1.5 million euro available for the whole lot. By the way, this presentation is recorded and it will be available on the Eurosteer website, so you can go and revisit. But basically, you find all the relevant information in the guidance. So that's the Bible of this call. Again, a quick reminder: if you do have technical questions, do not forget to send them to our functional mailbox. Again, you find this in the guidelines for the call. If you missed the information session yesterday, you may want to rewatch it. It basically gives you a little bit of context on how we came up with this call, what are our priorities for society work. On Thursday, we will have our first training for how to draft your concept note. So if you're interested in that, I hope you registered. If not, you will be streamed on Facebook. However, you will not have questions. That is it on my side. In the meantime, I'm informed that one of my colleagues has joined. I don't know, Andrei, if you would like to step in, if you have anything to add. Okay, so thanks a lot to everyone. As I said, short and to the point. Good luck to everyone with the application. I hope as many of you will apply and that you will set up nice and meaningful partnerships that would be. Thanks a lot. Okay, no. Andrei, I cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now? Hi.
Yes, I can. Hi.
So sorry for that, I had a connection problem. Hi, everybody. My name is Andrei Spivak. I'm Sector Manager, Law Enforcement. Just to add up to what Cinziana said, we are interested in somebody and some proposals which not only identify the problems, but suggest solutions. So if there is a problem, we would really like to see an analysis or your assessment of how this problem can be addressed, causes, roots, but more importantly, how we can fix it. So therefore, we are looking more at the somewhat professional the organization or a proposal which will bring experts around to definitely, number one, monitor the reform pace and the quality, and number two, to have ready solutions if possible. So that's what we meant, and that's what we were looking under this subsector, if you will, subsection of the call. Okay, Cinziana, over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Sorry, I got disconnected there for a moment. Okay, well, I think this is it. Thanks a lot for stepping in. Thanks a lot to everyone again for participating. And in case you have further questions, feel free to send them to our functional mailbox. Thanks a lot. Have a nice day.